Thank you for joining us today for the AASHTO Re-University free webinar series, Making the AASHTO Resource Proficiency Sample Program Work for You. I'm Kim Swanson, the Communications Manager at AASHTO Resource, and I'll be acting as moderator today. Today, we are joined by John Malusky, Proficiency Sample Program Manager, and Ryan LaQuay, Laboratory Testing Manager. So thank you for being here today, gentlemen.
Thanks, Kim. We are glad to be here and glad to be doing this presentation for everyone. As Kim mentioned, we are going to try to do our best to encourage some participation and hopefully share some experiences that you've had with the Proficiency Sample Program and doing what you can to make the program work for you. I just want to say our names again here. I'm John Malusky, the Program Manager for the Proficiency Sample Program. And I've asked Ryan LaQuay, our Laboratory and Testing Manager, to join us. He's got a lot of experience doing our homogeneity and stability testing within the laboratory. So he's going to do his best to provide some information with what we have to offer as well. And I'm going to go ahead and allow Ryan to take it over here.
All right. So today's overall goal is we're going to try and squeeze the most juice out of the orange, as it were. Basically, try and get as much out of our program and the information we provide to you to provide the most impact for your operation in laboratory testing. So what we're going to be doing here, our first objective is going to cover the performance charts that we include with every analysis. We're going to cover the performance charts, show what's included with those, how to evaluate the charts, how to use them to track history, and then how to use them to locate occurrences and trends within your testing. Our second objective, which John will cover, is ensuring quality using our program. This includes technician training and evaluation, how to use the samples to evaluate equipment for any possible issues that might be affecting your testing, and any other possible uses that have come up that we've encountered or maybe even you've encountered. We'll try and get that with that last objective. All right, to start off with performance charts. The program, we include performance charts as part of your evaluation for laboratory. This is included with every single sample that we create that has an analysis. And this is what it looks like. To find it, you're going to go to the sample round, go to the line item, and then on that third line down, you'll see a link for View Performance Chart. Click on that, and it'll take you right to that line items chart. On that chart, there's a couple different pieces of information that you can see. Example here is a sieve analysis chart for the 3/8 inch. We have the grand average, just the red line going across the middle. That is the repeatability, not the individual round averages. We have the z-score shown on the left side. On this one's from 0 up to 3. Across the graph, we have the data points for the sample rounds. You have the odds and the evens represented by the circles and the squares. If you look down towards the bottom of the graph, we also have the sample round for each year / round. You can find up to 10 rounds worth of data on a chart.
And also just to let everyone know that the one thing that when we're looking at these specific performance charts, you can see we have the odd and even sample there. The odd is the circle and the even is the square. One thing to note that the distance between those two sample points is the within lab repeatability estimate for each laboratory.
Right. So example for this one here on sample 197, 198, those 2 points are so close that they're essentially touching. The repeatability on that round is fantastic. If you go to the next one, though, on 201, 202, the repeatability between the two is a little greater, showing the variation in the test results. The performance charts can be used to track the history. So this first chart here on the left, we have one from the asphalt ignition sample. And this is a newer sample for the one we pulled from. It's got 3 rounds worth of data. Any previous rounds before the laboratory has joined and submitted testing, nothing will show up, no data submitted. On the right, we have 10 rounds of data from the coarse aggregate sample. you can see that it's got every round with a data point there. It's only 10 rounds at a time, but if you go back in history, it'll show whichever one you select as the most recent one. So if you want to go back 5 years, 10 years, it'll do that data going backwards. So that is an option that you can look into as well.
Yeah, that's a good point, Ryan. We have some laboratories who have been in the program for decades. So you can go back and look as far back as you have entered data within the round, and it should be still populated there. We have not truncated or eliminated any data. As long as the parameter was there in existence within the program, it's still available for you to evaluate and take a look at. So you can track the trends over a long duration of time if you'd like to, and even compare decades and specific rounds of evaluation.
Speaking of, looking for occurrences and trends within your data, you can take a look at this and see, is there something that happened? Oh, we got a low score this one time, or we get low scores repeatedly. It lets you look back in time and see, when did this start happening? Which way are we trending? Are we getting above average results? Are we getting below average results? Is it something that is correlated to another part of the test method? Or is it a standalone unique issue? So example on these two, so the first one on the left is the PGB sample BBR stiffness for trial 2. You see on 255 and 256, we had one round of scores that was very far away from the average. And it's not in line. All the rest of the scores, for the most part in the history of this sample for this lab fell very close to the grand average. This one time, was a poor score. So you can look at it like, all right, well, what happened this year? Did we have a new piece of equipment? Did we have a new technician? Was there something that happened specifically that year that we then changed, that following year and corrected? So that's one way to look back at the history of the sample. On the right, we're looking at the course aggregate sample for the bulk specific gravity. You can see here, we have a very definite downward trend. Started on the 193 and 194 sample and stayed below average since then for the next 6 years. What happened 6 years ago? Again, same thing. Was there a new technician, new training procedure, new equipment? Something happened between 189, 190, and 193, 194. And whatever it was hasn't been fixed since then. So you can see that there's a trend and a problem that still needs to be addressed with the one on the right. As compared to the one on the left, the PGB sample, where it appears that problem has already been solved. So it's kind of lets you see, here's where an issue is, and here's something we can focus in on.
Yeah, and the one other thing to kind of point out too as well, if you look on the chart on the left-hand side with the estimated stiffness for trial 2, for the laboratories who are aware with the PGB program, we ask you to submit 2 trials, trial 1 and trial 2. And it's one of those things where you could look at the line item for trial number 1, which appears, preceding this round or this line item, and you can see if you're having an issue with both samples. Was it beam 1? Was it beam 2? Or was it an individual, isolated event, or did it happen with the multiple beams? Same way when you're looking at the performance chart on the right-hand side for the course aggregate. This specific chart is the bulk specific gravity for oven dry density. Well, as we know, a lot of these parameters are related to each other. So this oven dry density issue that we're seeing, is it also related to the saturated surface dry value? Is it related to the apparent specific gravity? Is it related to absorption? So you can take a look at each parameter and see if there's an issue with the parameter, or is it kind of a cascading effect? Same thing with a sieve analysis. You might see an issue on one sieve, and it could be isolated to that specific piece of equipment or that sieve size, or you could kind of see that cascade or trickle down effect, and it may run its way through the entire sieve stack, or all the way from your wash. So you can use the charts to go well beyond just simply looking at the specific line item. You'd want to take the time and investigate multiple line items and multiple charts just to get a full full view of what you could possibly have going on with your laboratory. So I think that's about it with what we have for the performance chart portion of it. We will go ahead and circle back toward the end of the session to look for any kind of questions or comments. I see there is some information that we have in the chat right now, but we'll go ahead and we'll look at some of that information later. So I will move on to talk about ensuring quality. So this is kind of the portion of the presentation where we're going to go a little bit beyond the normal stuff that we talk about with PSP, with simply assigning ratings and whether you got a 5 or a 4. Do you need to do a corrective action? We're going to kind of move beyond that and discuss information about where we see other laboratories utilizing this program and how we actually utilize the program ourselves internally. So we're going to talk about things like technician training and evaluation, equipment evaluation and verification, and then some of the other uses that I had mentioned that we have seen in the program over the course of the years. If any of you are interested in any of these other items for additional discussion, Ryan and I are more than willing to chat with you about it. Off this webinar, feel free to email us or give us a phone call, and we'll do our best to try to help you out. So the first thing I'm gonna do is talk about technician training and evaluation. We have the regular round analysis at everyone who participates in the program, the individual technician. You can kind of see exactly where they're at and how they did during that round. And, it's a method to evaluate technician performance. And if there is an issue with the technician performance, or if there's an issue with a piece of equipment and you receive a low rating, then you're going to go through the corrective action process. And that process is in the AASHTO accreditation program realm, it's for any rating of a 2 or lower, so a 2, a 1, or a 0. But the accreditation program would only take action on the accreditation for consecutive rounds with low ratings of 0s or 1s. So there is still a corrective action process for a 2. We are also aware of other industries and agencies who would require the corrective action process for 2s, 1s, and 0s in our program. But that process is intended to identify what happened, right? It's a corrective action. You're going to look for the root cause, and hopefully you can determine that. And the good part about the rounds and being a part of the continuous program is that you can see if those corrective actions were implemented effectively. And if you were successful in your quest to look for the true issue. One of the other things that AASHTO Resource offers is our XPS program, or our Extra Proficiency Sample Program. Now, this is also used for accreditation issues. If a laboratory receives low ratings 2 consecutive rounds and they are suspended from the accreditation program for that specific test method, they usually purchase a blind sample from AASHTO Resource. And the blind sample is used in conjunction with the corrective action process to go ahead and try to resolve that. So the laboratory would receive the blind sample, they would test it, submit the data back to AASHTO Resource, and our quality analysts in the accreditation program will evaluate the data as well as the corrective action. And if the corrective action and data is satisfactory, then we would go ahead and reinstate the accreditation. That's kind of the normal run-of-the-mill thing that we see. But we also do offer the other samples that I was mentioning, and it's basically every single round of material that we have. We've got, what would you say, Ryan, maybe 3 to 5 years on some of the materials. Some even go beyond that, I think, in inventory.
Beyond 5 is getting a little tricky, but 3 to 5 is pretty good.
Yeah, I think we might have some reference sands and some soil CBR R values, soil class samples that we might have that go a little bit beyond 5 years, but for the most part, 5 years is kind of the cutoff on it. The one thing that we do is we offer these at a discounted rate, since there's no portion of the accreditation or data analysis with it on our end. We basically give the discount of about a 50% discount on the samples, because like I said, we don't have to pick up the accreditation component and have that on our end. So they offer at a little bit of a discount rate. We will show you how to calculate the ratings on your own using the z-scores and standard deviations and your average and your value as compared to the grand average. So it's an option for technician training. And we also have retained materials. So that's one thing that you can do. I know there are a lot of samples where people kind of say to us, hey, you really didn't provide us with enough material. Soil classification is one of those materials. We provide enough for the laboratories to do the testing. and we do not provide enough for the laboratories to use enough material for one moisture content point for ASTM Proctor. We're well aware of that, but we also don't want to go and send the laboratory like 60 pounds of a clay blend. It would be a lot of material. But if you do have any extra material, you can easily use that material for technician training and evaluation. The example here we have in the photo, liquid limit, doesn't really take that much material up. And if you have any retained from your sample, feel free to use it for technician training. You've got a grand average and you've got a Z-score. You could easily have a technician run the test to determine what their liquid limit is and go ahead and rate them and say, hey, look, we did this one pretty well, or this looks like there's a portion that we need to work on. There's some sort of issue with your training. So, by all means, that's an opportunity there with something you've already paid for and you've already gotten data out of.
Actually, John, if I jump on that real quick.
Sure.
I'll give you a little callback from my days when I assessed, because I went to areas where they didn't have soil that was readily available that went well for the liquid limit and plastic limit tests, which we need to see for the assessment. So one of the best pieces of advice I was told and told pass on, tell them to hold on to their soil sample, put it on a shelf, bring it back out for your assessment. It makes life a lot easier on both sides.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. That's a really good tip. Same thing with, I've had laboratories when I would do my asphalt binder assessments, years ago, they had the retained material for years. And if they knew that we had a sample that was pretty good, pretty easy to test, they would take it and use it for the assessments. Just made it a little bit easier for them. And they had material readily available. So great, very good point, Ryan. Appreciate that. Thank you. So now we're going to talk about, like I said, things, gaps in training processes. Is there's something going on where we hired a new technician, or we made a little bit of a change to our quality manual, and you can kind of see here in these charts between samples 189 and 190 and 193 and 194 with our course ag. There's something changed. We still have decent ratings. We went from grand averages and Z-scores or Z-scores around 0 to Z-scores that go beyond 1. So we've got 4s, 4s or 3s with our laboratory ratings, but we did see a shift. And you can see how the trend continues within this laboratories testing data, extends basically right up until last year, this past course aggregate round. So it's pretty apparent that something happened within that round, and there's some sort of bias going on with that laboratory. Was it a new piece of equipment? Was it a new technician? Is it a training issue itself, or did something happen like the standard changed? Was there a revision to the AASHTO or ASTM standard? And did we happen to miss that revision? And a lot of other laboratories picked up on it. They were made aware of it, and they made the appropriate adjustments. So it's kind of one of those things where, as Ryan and I have been mentioning here, you can go back and you can see those specific points, and you can identify the potential issues that may have occurred with something like training. And speaking of that, in-house, so the AASHTO accreditation, the laboratory assessment program uses the proficiency samples for training with every single new hire that we have. Here are some photos of training with our laboratory assessors, and all of them get a binder at the beginning of their training. I don't know, it's probably a solid 2 inches thick, and they have all the tests and the reports, the data sheets and all the information they're going to need to perform the tests. And part of the training process is that they perform the tests and they receive satisfactory ratings. And just like any other laboratory, if they do not receive satisfactory ratings in their training, they actually have to go back and retest and try to figure out what they did incorrectly, whether it was a procedural issue or something happened with the equipment. And they go back through and they do their best to dig out whatever the issue was and try to take care of it. So, it's one of those things where we use the samples for that purpose, with our own staff.
Since we're on the theme of Throwback Thursday, when I was first hired and did training, I had an issue on the uncompacted void test. Ran through, got a poor rating, went back with Matt, who at the time was our training manager. Ran again. He's like, I don't know what you're doing wrong. What time did you do this at? I told him, and that's the exact time the commuter train goes behind our office. So that one random thing was enough for me to I had to dig and find out what's going wrong there.
Yeah, so the AASHTO resource office is perfectly located about 30 feet away from a freight and rail line that runs right toward downtown Frederick, and then extends, I believe, out toward Baltimore. And we have frequent freight train and commuter train traffic. So I guess that vibration screwed up your uncompacted voids. That's perfect story.
Yep.
All right, so we'll move on. We'll talk about equipment evaluation. This is one of those other things that you can use the proficiency samples for, beyond the norm. And things like the XPS program that I've mentioned, where you can purchase those samples a little bit cheaper for use with this kind of stuff. For the aggregates for things like sieve analysis, soil for classification compaction, liquid asphalt, and also things like the CBR and R value samples. And I know that Ryan, you can probably share some of the stuff that we use the ag samples for within our laboratory.
Yeah, so I have a supply of both fine and coarse aggregate, angular and rounded, that I keep on hand every year for my sieving sufficiency checks. And I already know the angularity, I know the makeup of the gradation, so it makes it a lot easier for me rather than trying to find a new sample every year to run this through and make sure that our sieving is sufficient.
Yeah, it works out well too for us. We typically use similar sources, so we keep those retained. We have had some discussions with some laboratories about using it for other tests. One of the things that we have done with the soil classification and compaction, we've got quite a bit of data out there, and laboratories have solicited us to buy samples, and then they'll use that for things like comparing their standard and mechanical compactors for the oh my gosh, I'm losing
Proctor.
it. For the Proctor. Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate it. And also other things like we've had discussion about micro Duval, using the samples as a possible reference material for micro Duval. We kind of shy away from that a little bit because we do not have a lot of that retained. But you can order some of it if you need to, and you want to try to run something for a standard loss material. So it is possible. Same thing with liquid asphalt. We've got PGB, BAC, anything like that you're interested in. You notice you don't see things like emulsion, traffic paint, or slurry micro on here, and that's because we're concerned about the stability. We do typically have materials that are stable well beyond the end of the round, but we basically discard them 8 to 12 months beyond the round date, because we're too afraid they're not going to hold up, and we don't want to send anybody a sample that's been compromised just from settlement or storage stability. Okay, and then we'll move on to the next big question here, and is that, are the PSP samples considered CRMs? And a CRM is what constitutes a certified reference material. And the answer to that is no. Unfortunately, the PSP samples are not considered certified reference materials. However, we can consider them to be used as a reference material. And it's simply because the definition here that you can see, materials sufficiently homogeneous and stable with respect to one or more properties, which has been established to be fit for its intended use in a measurement process. And it's kind of the big reason why I had Ryan come in on this presentation and share his experiences with what we do with homogeneity and stability. So I'm going to go ahead and let you talk about what you do for most of your day.
Right. So my job title is laboratory and testing manager, and that testing portion covers our homogeneity and stability testing for all of our samples. So whenever each sample is initially created, we pull 10 samples aside. We have the odd and even side. Pull 10 samples out and run testing on that to make sure it's a nice homogeneous sample. We then ship out 3 additional samples, and when the round closes, we'll get those 3 back, compare those against 3 samples that we've kept in our facility. So we're going to check, make sure it was stable throughout the whole shipping and testing process. We'll make sure that someone who ran their test at the beginning, as soon as they got their sample, and someone who ran their test on the day it was due, we want to see that those results are stable, and the sample is stable throughout the entire round of testing. Beyond that, I also perform 1 year, 3 year, and 5 year stability checks. This is what we used for the XPSs, both for resolving app suspensions and for shipping out to people who need them for training and whatnot. And like John mentioned a moment ago, we don't want to send out any sample that isn't a good quality. So you want to make sure that it still holds up to the original sample, so that way whenever you use it and test it and get results, those results are still comparable to the original samples. So that's our kind of a quality assurance on our side.
Yeah, we have actually had some discussion internally about using the PSP samples, or at least trying to get the classification of a CRM with some of the samples. And we've kind of gone back and forth with it. One of our concerns is just the inherent variability within samples. I mean, Ryan tests like crazy, and there are times where he and I will just sit there and scratch our heads, and we cannot figure out why a sieve analysis sample will fail a t-test. But when you look at the variation, the percent passing, what, Ryan, we've seen some less than 3/4% passing the 200. I mean, even a 1/10%, and it fails a t-test from the round, and you sit there and you scratch your head and like,
yeah,
I don't know what we're going to do to ever get this to work.
Right. We have some that are so well homogeneous that it'll fail stability, where the testing will be, within 2 to 3 thousandths on the results, and that's too homogeneous for our stability statistics to pass.
Yeah, it kind of puts us in a little bit of a catch-22, but so we are looking into that. But like I said, you can also consider that material as a reference material if you would like, and use it for some of this, these things with your equipment or your technician training, and verify how things are working out. Then we have some other uses for ensuring quality within the industry, and that would fall under the corporate quality programs, industry quality programs, some alternative testing, and also ruggedness studies. So I'm going to just briefly touch on some of these items. Corporate quality programs and industry quality programs. This comes out a lot from being active and involved with AASHTO and ASTM, as well as other parts of the industry, different things like pavement associations and user producer groups. So here we've got liquid asphalt suppliers and refiners. We have had major, high-end, large companies come to us and say, we need to purchase another 50 or 60 cans of your PGB, simply because we want to do our own in-house QA QC program. And we would like to use your material because you've got such a great database of information. So that's happened in the past. We've had state departments of transportation come in and say, we want all of the laboratories in our state all of the state laboratories within our districts, and in our counties, participate in the program. And we would also like to buy samples from you for that purpose. So they do their own internal round robin. We also have asphalt user producer groups. They have asked us for, material. We've also shared data with different user producer groups. Other international agencies have come to us and basically solicit us for the information. We've had some state agencies work with, local industry agencies and get together on, qualified program or qualification programs where it helps with things like dispute resolution and third-party testing. So there are other opportunities out there that are available in some states, or you could even mention these things to us, and we could chat with you about the way that those programs work. And you can take it to your state, your pavement association, whoever it is, and see if it's something that might be of interest to the group. And then one of the last things we're going to touch on are things like alternative testing and ruggedness studies. We've recently done some work with some environmental facilities who purchased soil samples from us for things like sediment retention devices. It was just kind of a total oddball anomaly, but they needed a soil sample that was of known value for different properties. And they asked us if we could provide something that was in the gradation and the USDA soil triangle that they needed. And we had a few different samples that met the criteria. So we went ahead and we sent that to them. And also things like ruggedness studies. We've had several new pieces of equipment come into the industry within the realm of asphalt testing. And we have sent hundreds of cans of asphalt to different laboratories, different pieces of equipment. Same thing with some of the newer test methods in asphalt mixtures with things like the automated extraction device. We were part of a ruggedness study where we provided the material for that. And there was also an ASTM study a few years ago where we provided our coarse aggregate material for the flat and elongated test with the proportional caliper. So, the materials are used for many things that go well beyond the proficiency sample program itself. And, hopefully if you're involved in any of that kind of stuff, you can use us as a source, use us for things like training and competency. And hopefully we can do our best to provide additional services to you beyond just, the annual rounds and Z-scores and ratings. We're trying to do our best to service the industry as much as possible. So I think with that, Kim, I'm going to turn it back over to you here, and we're going to see if we have anyone out there who's got any kind of experience using the program beyond the normal things.
Yeah, if you want to raise your hand so you can verbalize, or you can put it in the Q&A in the chat. But yeah, I'm sure everyone would love to hear how you use the program. Getting some good questions into that we'll hold off to the end. So, but how have you guys, what's the weirdest thing? I'm going to ask John this as we wait for people to be brave enough to want to talk into the webinar. But what's like the weirdest thing that you've heard somebody use our program for, John?
The weirdest? Ooh.
Or more off the wall or whatever.
You're putting me on the spot now.
I am. Totally fair.
Ooh. Can't really think of anything that crazy. I mean, the general stuff, the weirdest thing is actually probably, I probably heard was the sediment retention stuff that I had mentioned before. I had never in my mind, I think someone would come up to us and want to buy 40 boxes of CBR material from this specific round because they liked it so much and they wanted to test it against their retention walls. I was like, okay, sure, we'll sell it to you. That's probably been the most far out from what we do, to be honest with you. Said, I don't know if anybody else has anything that they've used it for, but that's probably been the most off the wall one that I think we've had.
Okay. Nobody seems to want to share their experiences, unfortunately. We can come back though, or if you want to share, we can open this up at the end as well. So if you get your courage up there.
All right, thanks, Kim. I appreciate it. So we're going to just go ahead and kind of circle back to the recap of the learning objectives. And let me get there. So like I said, in the beginning, Ryan went ahead and he kind of gave us a discussion, a good discussion on the performance charts, how we review them, how we evaluate and track the history, and also how you can possibly locate occurrences and trends within your data sets and within the performance charts. And hopefully there are some other, you see other venues or opportunities out there to evaluate that information, such as not just looking at that single test that you received a low rating on, or that single parameter, but going beyond that and looking at the parameters that are around it or associated with that specific test. And hopefully that will lead you to the correct root cause and the correct situation that needed to be resolved. And then we also touched base on some of the other opportunities that are out there within the Proficiency Sample Program for enhancing quality, such as using the samples as a means of technician and training and evaluation. And we also talked about evaluation of equipment and possible usage, and then talked about those other situations with things like user producer groups or sediment retention devices, or just totally different things and ruggedness studies that have been out there in the industry that we've been asked for. So appreciate that. And now we're at the time for any final questions, comments, or thoughts.
All right, we do have 2 questions that people have typed in. So feel free to type in your questions if you think of one or if this sparks something else. But the first question we have, and I'll address this to John, from an anonymous attendee. With the performance charts, is it possible to download the data in a CSV or an Excel ready file? We want to add a lot of this data to a spreadsheet for ongoing analysis, but haven't seen the option.
So at this point, that option is not available. However, we have been working on an IT solution for a few years now, and it's supposed to come live within the next probably 6 months or so. And that will be a functionality that we're going to have within the program. So you will be able to do a data dump, CSV, Excel, XLS, and you'll be able to take that information and use it to how you see fit. We are also hopefully getting some additional features within the performance charts and also with the Uden plots themselves. So if you're a current participant in the program, you're probably aware that we ask a lot of questions about things like pieces of equipment, what type of procedure you used. Did you use procedure A, procedure B, procedure C, whatever it was? And we are going to hopefully have the capability where you'll be able to filter the data by those specific parameters or properties. So it will not do a quote unquote mini analysis on specific individuals or laboratories who reported that data, but it will show you what laboratories did provide that information. It'll just show you them in the Uden plot. We're not at a point yet where we feel comfortable enough to go ahead and have that data be exportable to all participants. We will have the capability to provide that information to specifiers, standards developing bodies, or who we need to hopefully improve the standards and the technical process. But at this point, we are planning on doing some enhancements, so hopefully it'll work out for you. But that's a great question.
Yes, thank you for that. Our next question is, with the test results being so close as 0.001, how can we possibly determine a root cause for being out by 0.01, especially on a test that do not require 2 decimal places? So how can you really give a grade on something like that?
So that comes down to the accuracy of the test. And the one thing that we try to do, and I know that some laboratories, it's a challenge. When we do things like sieve analyses, we typically ask for 1 unit or 1 decimal place beyond what the laboratory or what is in the test method. And that's just simply to try to get that accuracy requirement within the standard. So it is difficult, it is challenging, and when it's something so finite, it can be tough. It's like looking for the needle in the haystack. And I guess my bigger thought is that happening over and over again? And could that be something that's seen in the performance charts, or is it a one-time event? It says we've constantly received a 2 or 3. So if you have a 3, there's really nothing to worry about. But if you're constantly receiving a 2, then there is something that's a consistency issue. So you might want to look at those performance charts and try to investigate and see what's going on with that. Ryan, I don't know if you could explain anything there as well. I think that's.
Yeah, I mean, it's the 2 and 3, unfortunately, is it's a very important inflection point. That's probably not the right term for it, but it's a very important line. If you're on the 3 side, you get the pass. If you're on the 2, you get the fail. So if you're bouncing around between the 2 and the 3, there might still be something there.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, my biggest thing is the consistency part. If it was just a 2 at random, the way that statistics work, it's going to happen sooner or later. But if it's a consistent thing and you're seeing it happen, then I would take a look at the performance charts and see how you're trending from year to year and see if there's any kind of bias. That would be my suggestion.
All right, thank you. Now I had a question, and Tara, I'll get to your question too, but I just had a question as you were talking about that, John, that you said that this you asked for more decimal places than what the test method requires. What are some of the other things that you may be asking for? Because I know sometimes our proficiency sample data sheets has more information and more spots for that. So what other types of things do you ask for, and why?
Yeah, so we do this very, very regularly. Ask for things like pieces of equipment, and as I kind of mentioned, like a method A or method B. Things like mechanical washing versus manual washing for a sieve analysis. And then we'll ask for the time that the laboratory washed for. And we're collecting all that information, all that data to provide to AASHTO or the ASTM technical subcommittees to make revisions on the standards, or we might be, for the specific procedure. We might also be looking for an update to the precision estimates within standards. We provide a lot of data for that purpose. One other thing, this past round, if anyone here is part of the slurry and micro program that just wrapped up, I think the report was issued today. We solicited the laboratories to actually provide the critical dimensions on a majority of the testing equipment. And that is, we're not going to touch that data. No one is going to look at that from the accreditation program and pass any kind of judgment. That is simply meant to provide to the International Slurry Surfacing Association, so they can look at the equipment and actually provide tolerances on their equipment and the pieces of equipment to make sure that people can meet specification, and they're reasonably assigning the values that they need to. So.
And also we have some line items where it's just informational. One that's currently out right now, the hot mix solvent ignition. We're asking for your initial weight, because if there's an error with that, we want to know that first before we go and put everything through the system. So we're using that as another catch-all on the back end.
Oh, thank you for that.
Yeah, that's actually really good, Ryan. You kind of sprung another thing into my brain. For this round with the gyratory testing, we actually got some feedback with labs. Why are you asking us for what our sample weight was prior to doing the bulk testing? And we found out that through our experience and through experiences with the laboratories, that dry weight of the specimen has a pretty strong correlation with how well you scraped your sample bowl, which has a pretty good correlation with your compaction height. So we're using that as no one's going to get suspended for the test method because of that, but we're just simply using that as information to provide to laboratories to say, hey, here's something else that you might want to go ahead and look at to see why you got a low rating on a different portion of this PT. So
thank you for that. Now, Tara would like to know, could you explain the type of sample that we will receive for the aggregate gradation and gravity samples that are replacing coarse ag and fine ag? Will these samples be a blend of coarse and fine ag, or will it be just one? So explain that more.
Okay, sure. Yeah. So, this is a new program that we are releasing. And basically, it's not really new. I guess I want to say it's reorganized. So we are changing from a coarse ag and fine ag sample program to aggregate degradation and a aggregate gradation and gravity sample program. So the program is going to be split. The degradation sample is going to come out in January, and the gradation and gravity sample is going to come out sometime around the end of June or July. You just kind of need to see how the production schedule is going to roll out right now. But both samples will have combined aggregate of coarse and fine. The one difference that we're going to have this year with the gradation and gravity sample is that we will have a sieve analysis sample, which is a mixture of coarse and fine. The coarse portion of that mixture is what is going to be used for the specific gravity portion for ASTM C127. When you are using there will be, I should say this way, there will be another bag of fine aggregate, specifically fine aggregate that's passing the number 4, that will be used for the C128 or AASHTO T84 fine ag specific gravity. So, yep, you'll have one separate gradation sample. That gradation sample will be used, for that portion of it and for the coarse portion of the specific gravity, but then there'll be a separate baggie in there for the fine portion for the fine specific gravity.
Thank you for that, John. And for laboratories already in our programs and were previously enrolled in fine aggregate or coarse aggregate, that change has already been made in their sample or in their enrollment, correct?
Yep, that's correct. We went ahead and we tried to do our best to automatically do the enrollment for the laboratories. We used a lot of the information that we had in our database from accredited laboratories, and we actually looked at what test methods individual laboratories submitted data for. And we did our best to try to pull that information, and our IT manager was awesome, and he did a great job in sorting it and putting it together and making all of the enrollments so all of the laboratories did not have to do that on their own. And we did I think we did a pretty good job with it. We only had a handful of laboratories who had any kind of issue with it, and it was because of simple data sorting. But I think we're pretty confident that roughly 95% of the labs got the switch over without any kind of major issues. That's awesome when you're talking about 2,200 participants. So it's worked out well for us.
Yes, and if you notice a problem with that, let us know. If you look at your enrollment and you're like, oh, that's not what I expected, definitely reach out to us.
Yeah,
now,
absolutely.
Nathaniel has a question. For some of the tests, there are many labs who participate in proficiency tests that they only maintain for accreditation. They do not run these tests daily. For example, the fine aggregate specific gravity. I also know larger companies might share data internally between multiple labs before they submit. How do you account for these types of issues?
So that's the one of the tricky parts about the sample program. We try to do our best to make sure that all of the laboratories are testing with integrity. And, we do know that laboratories call each other and they talk. I'll get phone calls from laboratories who say, hey, I talked to the lab down the street and this is what they're getting. Can you confirm that? And I'll say, no, I can't confirm it. But it seems to be within what's reasonable for the testing data. So, I would say that while we can't really prevent collusion, we try to do our best to minimize it. Now, I will tell you that when I am conducting a data analysis or Ryan's conducting a data analysis, we will sit there and look at the scatter plot, and we will look for clusters of data. And if we see a cluster of data, we can easily identify the laboratory number that it came from. And if we see that cluster containing several laboratories that have the same name, we will notify the accreditation program of possible collusion. So while I can't say we can completely prevent it, I can tell you that we do screen for it.
Thank you.
And as it comes to the part where if you're never performing the test, if there's no reason for you to do it, then don't do it. I mean, especially if it's, unless you want to use it for training purposes. I mean, if you don't need to do it, don't do it.
Right. Look into why you're credited for it. Was it we needed it for one project 5 years ago and that's why we got it? If you're not doing it anymore, don't do it.
Yeah, that is a really good point. I'm going to think in a recent podcast episode, Brian and I discussed that similarly of, an accredited laboratory was like, well, why are we accredited for this? We don't want that. And it's like, well, we don't know unless you tell us, but we also don't want to charge you for being accredited for a test if you don't really need it. So
yeah, I just had to dive down that hole with the lab regarding the new aggregate sample. Like, well, we're enrolled in this and this, and like, what do we need for the next year? A day later, we find out that they were enrolled for something, 5 or 6 years ago. That was it. They didn't need it anymore.
Oh, that's rough to know that you've been paying for that for no reason.
Great training the last 5 years.
True, very true. So I'm going to do one last call. If anybody has any questions or if they want to share their experiences and how they use the Proficiency Sample Program, feel free to either raise your hand and I can unmute you or type it in. Seeing nobody. I want to thank John and Ryan here for answering all these questions and sharing all this information. Was there anything else that you guys maybe forgot to say or wasn't really included as part of the learning objectives, but really want to make sure you let everybody know about before we wrap up?
I mean, I just appreciate the time and having so many people come onto the webinar and listen to Ryan and I have this discussion. Hopefully it helps all of you out. I just cannot stress enough if you've got a question or a concern, feel free to email us or call us. We're here to help you. We're here to do our best to make sure that the testing is getting done correctly and appropriately within the standards, within the guidance of the standards. And, like I said, don't hesitate to contact us. That's what we're here for. And by all means, we've got TechX coming up in a couple of months. It might be a little cold in Minnesota, but this is the kind of content that we're going to be going through there. So, please, by all means, if you can attend, go ahead and try to sign up and see if you can get yourself to Minnesota in March.
Yes, and details on TechX and other upcoming events are on our events page. Ryan, I think I cut you off. No? Okay.
Nope, we're good.
Okay, we do have one other question, and that is, would you all be willing to put together documents to help laboratories troubleshoot low scores on specific tests?
So that's a great question, and that is actually one of the requirements of our ISO 17043 accreditation. We are recommended to provide suggestions and information as to how to help resolve deficiencies and corrective actions. And what we had been doing in the past is we have been having a compilation of findings from the laboratory assessment program. And we've had direct links within the PSP section of the website to link to that portion in the laboratory assessment program as a method of guidance to help resolve issues with the proficiency sample program. But as I mentioned, one of the best things you can do is shoot us an email or phone or call us, and we'll do our best to help you out.
Yeah, we're willing to do a deep dive there with you.
They're not just saying that, everybody. They really would like to do a deep dive into these types of things. So with all of that, I think we're going to wrap this up. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending. If you want to connect with us, you can follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn. And as I mentioned before, we have a podcast that you can find us on most podcast streaming services. So feel free to reach out to us for that. And again, thank you, everybody. Thank you, John. Thank you, Ryan, for your time today. And have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, Kim.
Thank you, Kim. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.